Hello. Welcome to the Futurum Tech Webcast. I'm your host, Shelley Kramer, and I'm joined here today by my colleague, Fred McClimans, and we're taking this conversation right to LinkedIn and to Twitter, and we hope you'll hang out with us. And today we're going to talk about the hack, what we think is a Russian hack targeting lots of government agencies. The list keeps getting longer and more alarming. And we're going to talk a little bit about the 3 A's that are involved in this hack. And I think you're going to find it's a really interesting conversation. Before we dive any deeper, I do want to say that this show is intended for informational and educational purposes only. And we bring our opinions, and lots of them. We are tech analysts. We have many opinions. Please don't take those opinions and use them as investment advice. This is not intended as such. So with that business out of the way, welcome, Fred. It's great to hang out with you today.
Hey, likewise, Shelley. Great to be here. We've got a big topic and always enjoy the big topic conversations with you.
A big topic. So the Pentagon, intelligence agencies, nuclear labs, and Fortune 500 companies use software that was found to be compromised by Russian hackers. And the sweep of stolen data is still being assessed. In the last few days, we keep having companies and organizations throughout the government added to the list of people who are compromised. We wanted to take a minute and just step back and kind of look at the timeline here. And Fred, I know that is something you've spent a little bit of time talking or thinking about rather and researching. So lay it out for us, would you?
So timelines are always subject to interpretation at different times. Right. But based on what we now know, again, subject to change, back in March of 2020, the alleged Russian hackers, they're suggesting now that it was APT-29 or the Cozy Bear, the Advanced Persistent Threat team, that has also been involved in a number of other state-sponsored attacks in the United States. They managed to get access to the SolarWinds system. Now, SolarWinds, in particular, this was their Orion platform. SolarWinds is a provider of ITSM or IT service management tools. Essentially, they provide the dashboard, the single pane of glass that allows an organization to monitor everything within their IT organizations, their networks, their communications, their computers, their servers, the works. So gaining access to this type of a tool, that's a big thing.
It's a big thing.
Huge thing. So now between March and June of 2020, it's believed that about 18,000 of SolarWinds customers out of, I think, 500,000 total or so?
300,000 is the number that I saw.
Okay, 300,000. So what they did, those organizations, as part of their normal routine operations, they would download updates to their software. Well, that's where this group targeted their attack. So inside SolarWinds and the Orion platform, they managed to install code into the software update system so that when these organizations went out and did what they're supposed to do, update their software on a regular basis, right, they were bringing the hack attack into their organization. So once they get into the organization, they kind of sit there and they wait and they discover and move around. Now let's fast forward to last week, where FireEye, one of the leading cybersecurity firms in the country and in the world, realizes they have been breached. So they start to dig into this and figure out what's going on. Where did this come from? And it was in that process there that they came across and discovered the vulnerability in the SolarWinds Orion platform update.
Well, and let me just interject here real quickly. Who uses SolarWinds software?
So
all 5 branches of the U.S. military,
yep,
the Pentagon, the State Department, NASA, the National Security Agency, the Department of Justice, the White House, 10 leading U.S. telecoms companies, the top 5 U.S. accounting firms, and many others. I mean, so this is, potentially a very big kind of exposure in terms of targets.
It is from a target perspective, but I think it's important to recognize that with this type of an operation, this is a stealth operation. Right. A lot of hacks, you can break them into different categories. If somebody's interested in just obtaining data quickly, they break into a system and they just download everything they possibly can. Or they lock things up if they're going to do a ransomware attack. In this type of state-sponsored activity, it's more about gathering intelligence, and it's finding a way to stay within the system without being detected.
Right.
So very often we'll see threats come into a system. They're quiet for a while, as they were here with SolarWinds, and then they move laterally through the system. They figure out, they discover, they explore, they find opportunities within there, which in and of itself is actually kind of a good thing, for those that are being attacked, because that means that the organization isn't necessarily at that point downloading lots and lots of data.
Right.
So while a lot of people may have been, impacted by this, it's not clear yet how much data was actually accessed or, what they were really going for. It doesn't minimize the threat.
No. And actually what SolarWinds has said is that, we talked about this earlier. They think that about 33,000 of its 300,000 customers, well, they know that 33,000 of its 300,000 customers use Orion, and they believe only half of those have downloaded. So this is like one of the instances where not being on top of your software downloads might actually prove to be a good thing, right?
It might be.
And only half of those have downloaded the Russian compromised update. But they also think that the actual number of compromised targets was in the dozens, but they are all, as they have been quoted saying, the highest value targets.
Right.
So it really isn't that, thousands of companies have been impacted. It is that, cyber espionage professionals are smart. They know what they're looking for. They know what they want. They're patient.
Yep.
So I think that that's very much that's at play here.
Yeah, certainly. It's important too to recognize the different type of targets that a threat actor may be going after. Certainly, we see state-sponsored activities around economic issues, around business and technology issues. We had a lot of talk about threats coming in from Russia or China or other actors during the COVID-19 vaccine development process.
Right.
Very interested people trying to get intellectual property. That's been a long issue with the Chinese groups as well. With Chinese groups coming in, finding their way into technology companies to lift technology, essentially. But there's also sort of that larger picture. There's finding that strategic target, OPM database, the Chinese hacked back in 2016, where they were, specifically looking for lots of records of information on people. In this situation here, we're not quite sure what they were really going after in some of these government organizations, but there's a lot there. Think about the DOJ and the White House, certainly. But for me, I think the biggest risk in all of this, it goes back to mirror something that took place back again in 2016 with the Chinese hack. Back in 2016, China hacked and was able to gain access to NSA tools that the NSA used for accessing other systems as part of their activities. They then, shared that and they used that. And in fact, we believe that the Russians used it. We believe that North Korea used it in some of their activities as well. In this situation here, what we have is FireEye recognized that their red team attack tools had been compromised. Now, when we talk about red team in the cybersecurity space, we're always trying to figure out, how good defenses are and how we can break in and how we can defend. Right. And they do that through essentially a war game, a red team, blue team activity. Blue team, good guys, red team, bad guys. So now this particular hack group, they have obtained access to all of FireEye's red team tools, the very tools that FireEye uses to test the defenses of all their clients. And that's a huge thing. That's huge out there.
It is huge.
Because now you have that whole threat, everything, the intellectual property and all the capabilities of FireEye being turned against FireEye and every other company potentially out there. Now, FireEye, I'm certain, they are deep right now into figuring out ways to counter that and to close that off and to monitor for it. But it's a big threat there.
So when we talk a little bit about, we've mentioned, industrial targets and utilities, and actually we didn't talk about utilities, but that's a given, government agencies and things
Anything
like that.
in critical infrastructure, yes.
Right. So to kind of break this down a little bit, so these vulnerabilities that FireEye discovered is in software used by millions of connected devices, and they're flaws that can be exploited by hackers to penetrate both businesses and home computer networks and exploit them. Think smart plugs, thermostats, printers, routers, healthcare appliances in hospitals,
Pacemakers.
components of industrial control systems,
Yeah.
think utilities, remote controlled temperature sensors and cameras. And they could also be used to control systems like water power and automated building management. So when you think about the reason this is such an, oh crap moment, is that this could potentially, it's a big hack. It's a very big deal. And it could potentially affect, beyond just the, government entity.
Absolutely. We have, for lack of a better phrase here, we have created a very complex, sophisticated digital infrastructure that doesn't just participate in our lives, it controls our lives. And for anybody to have the ability to turn that off for a moment, or to compromise it, or to cross the wire, so to speak, that is a significant event beyond. I mean, it approaches black swan, event theory here, and that's a risk that we certainly have to take a look at here. And it's think about when the Ring doorbell cameras are hacked, and that kind of circulates around. It's kind of an, oh well, hey, don't use a Ring, but people don't realize that basic IoT and industrial IoT technology is in everything that we have now.
Everything that we have, yes. And it's kind of scary. I saw somebody quoted, I was looking to see if I could find it, a very senior level. Here, Sarah Bloom Raskin, who is the Deputy Treasury Secretary under the Obama administration, said the attack was the day you prepare against. Like,
Yes.
In your whole career, your whole life, this is the attack you prepare against. And, it's been said that this attack is one of the biggest crises that the NSA has ever encountered. So it is a big deal. And the other thing, beyond just the government impact, think a minute about senior executives from major corporations the world over are working from home.
Yeah.
Okay. And they are using routers. And by the way, it's not hard to figure out who these executives are either. I mean, come on, people are doing videos. It's not hard if this is your job and you're devoted to figuring it out, right? So senior executives in major corporations the world over are working remotely. They're using routers, they're using printers, they're using devices that we know are actually easily compromised. Right. So when you kind of extrapolate that out in terms of what kind of, and I know that the risk that, certainly we might be subject to in our devices, but think about the information that is shared electronically. Some people use VPNs, some people don't use VPNs. And so it really is kind of an interesting thing. And another interesting thing that I ran across this morning as I was prepping for this is that Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, gave an interview with Breitbart, always the top source that I go to. And he refused to acknowledge that Russia is responsible. And he shifted blame to the Chinese or North Korea. And every expert out there that's talking about this is not pointing to China or to North Korea. This is, it's very, very common. Russia is the state actor who's consistently been the most successful in hacking attempts. And I haven't seen anybody other than Pompeo questioning that.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are a number of ways that you can kind of identify who somebody might be. There's the overall behavior of that organization, how they behave, how they approach a potential target, the surveillance and the information gathering process they go through before they actually try and penetrate an organization. Then you have the steps that they take within that organization. It's sort of a behavioral fingerprint of sorts. Much like, I can hear footsteps in the hallway and recognize, oh, that's, this child, not the other child, that's out there.
That's my friend attack.
Yeah, but then you also have the tools themselves that they use, the preferred tools. And, let's be open and honest about this. In this world, it's not just Russia and China and North Korea that have these capabilities. The United States has these capabilities as well. And of course, now the big question is what type of counter, action potentially, takes place here. And I could see, in sort of the big picture, a bit of reluctance on the part to actually pin definitive blame on one organization here so early into an attack. But, all the signs seem to point to, the Russian state-sponsored activity here in this. I liked, Shelley, though, a few minutes ago, you were talking about the data that you can gather, coming off.
Let's go to those 3A's that we promised when we started.
It's interesting because I read an article last week that talked with the executives at Zoom, and they had their oh crap moment when they watched a Zoom call with the UK government, and they're watching the Zoom screen, and they go, "Wait a minute, there are their names. There's the meeting ID." All this information, and we forget about the stuff that people can gather from what's behind us,
absolutely,
pictures and so forth. But what you got me thinking about there was the idea that a lot of these hacks, they're part of a larger puzzle. It's one little tiny piece of a large mosaic. And these hacks, especially on the state-sponsored side, what we see is they're really looking to gain information. They're looking to paint a digital profile of individuals, of organizations, of networks, of behavior, of connections that they can possibly make there, just so they can better understand. In fact, in the tech space, we talk often about, a digital twin.
Right.
Well, in essence, we are putting out so much information that we are creating a digital twin that somebody can literally mirror all of the organizations and the people that we have within the United States or within any country for that matter. So here we get, though, the 3A's. We talked about this earlier. And I think this is important to understand the magnitude of the threat that we face here. So there are 3A's that I look at to kind of determine what's taking place and what the risk of something could potentially be. And these are 3 processes that organizations on the threat side go through, but they also are the same 3 steps that people on the commercial side go through as well when they're dealing with data and customers and so forth. So let's kind of walk through these real quickly. First A, acquire. The goal of the threat actor, just like a corporate business, is to acquire as much information about an organization or an individual that they can. In the commercial space, they want to build that 360-degree view of the consumer. They want to be able to anticipate their needs and personalize everything. In the threat actor space, it's all about gaining every piece of digital data they can to exploit at a later point in time. So once you have all this data, all these different sources, and these can come from years and years. Go back to the OPM hack, all of the information about security clearances and government employees, the Aetna healthcare hack, the Experian hack, credit information, healthcare information, military records, all this information coming together. What you then do is you aggregate it all together. You put it out there, you throw it into a big data lake somewhere, you start, throwing, technology at it, throw machine learning and AI to figure out what are the patterns, what are the connections. So you essentially aggregate all that data together to draw connections and create a more complete profile of an organization. And then you get to the third step, which in the commercial space, this is how you monetize it. In the threat actor space, you activate that data to do something nefarious.
Kind of also how you monetize it.
Kind of also how you monetize it as well. So in this case here, maybe that information is pieced together to create a better profile so that you can impersonate a person. Right. Maybe you can get into sort of a bit of blackmail or extortion with that individual. It's all about gaining leverage and better understanding an organization. And that's exactly the process that we see here, the 3A's. They acquire a lot of information from different sources. They aggregate it together to find commonalities to paint a better picture. And then they selectively activate one step at a time. It's a very basic process, but we see it repeatedly in this type of threat.
And there's a reason they do it that way.
There is.
So one thing I wanted to touch on here, the CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Yes, it's part of this. Yeah.
Is part of this. They issued an emergency directive on Sunday to power down the SolarWinds software. Totally makes sense. Except for the fact that now what's happening is that these companies, these agencies who were used to relying on this software for access into a view into everything that's happening in their network, now they're running blind. And we've done some research. that I thought we could talk about a little bit. We've done some research for Dell on security and really, the presence of threat, and sometimes it's not really what people perceive it is, and what we see from people using a dashboard compared to people who aren't using dashboard. So this is a really big deal. I mean, to just be running blind with organizations of this size.
Right. So now think about this though, Shelley. If I'm a threat actor in the background and I'm trying to achieve an end goal, I always think of this sort of as a chess game, or for Star Trek fans out there, the 3-layer chess, that's out there. It's always deeper and richer than you expect.
Right.
And step back for a moment and say, well, maybe the goal of this, or one goal, one possible valuable outcome, is to actually get all these organizations to turn off the monitoring systems for just a moment. When they're off, now you can have a whole new wave of attacks coming in that they just simply can't see.
Field day.
It's kind of like a candy store. The candy store is wide open here for them. So we see those activities there, but it's important, when you talk about that inability to see, as you mentioned, we did a security study with Dell on hardware and supply chain security. And what we found in that was that organizations that didn't use effective dashboards were significantly more likely to say that they had never been hacked.
Right.
So you have organizations that are using security dashboards. They go, oh yeah, we've been hacked. Every year we get hacked.
And it happens
all you ask people that don't have that visibility, they go, no, we haven't been hacked. I don't think we've ever been hacked. It's sort of the Zaphod Beeblebrox, approach from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the great Douglas Adams. Put on the glasses. What you can't see can't hurt you. But the reality is it does.
Right.
And, that's a significant threat, coming out of this, just that lack of visibility into your operations. Not just, think about 2 ways, security operations, but then what about all the IT management that you need to have in place? Just basic business operations for your organization.
So what do you think? You think this is a great opportunity for vendors, vendors like Dell, to run in with, a solution that we can slide in? That's a problem with and SolarWinds is a great company.
Yeah.
They make great products. There's actually, no negative to say here, but the reality of it is this is a major hit to your brand. Where do you go from here? If you
so there are a couple of hits here. From sort of a corporate narrative perspective, right now, anybody that provides these type of tools is going to get dinged. It's a natural thing in that ecosystem. SolarWinds get hit. Every other dashboard provider out there, they're going to take a hit. Right. FireEye gets hacked. Every other cybersecurity company out there suddenly becomes suspect. To an extent. But I don't really see the negative impact for the security companies. It just, if anything, this demonstrates that they're needed more than ever.
Yeah.
But what I do think is that just like in the natural world environment, we only can exist because of biodiversity. In the technical space, I like to think of there being tremendous value in techno-diversity, diversity in the different types of technology that an organization has. If you have only one system and that system fails, and if it's complex, it's going to fail spectacularly, which we have in the case of people that are only using SolarWinds. So I'm a big believer and a proponent of saying, look, you want that single pane of glass, you want that dashboard, but have a second pane of glass from a different vendor that operates in a different way, so that if you have a failure in one system, you don't run into Airbus 737 Max 800 situations where there's no backup. You need a backup capability in place.
And I feel like that's a lot of what these pandemic times have taught business leaders, I hope have taught business leaders. And I know that we've talked a lot and thought a lot about this, but, you have to have a business continuity, a business resiliency plan. You have to say, these are the solutions that we're using. What happens if this goes to hell? What happens if, and having those conversations about worst case scenarios and what we do to quickly pivot and get ourselves whole again, I think are important conversations that we're learning we have to have all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. If your organization isn't thinking about, and this is sort of a dated phrase out here, but continuity of operations. The coup plans that we used to run through, in a significant way right after the 9/11 attacks.
Right.
That was a huge, emphasis there. A lot of organizations, I think, have let technology get ahead of them, and they haven't really thought through all the implications of, that, pardon my language, but the oh shit moment.
Right.
What happens when this fails? You have to have a backup plan. You have to have some type of resiliency, in your organization. And that's a big challenge. Love to talk to organizations about how they can improve that, and keep themselves one step ahead of the game, because it is a huge challenge. COVID and now the hack. Two things that virologists and security professionals have been preparing for. This is that day.
And I think that there are conversations that need to be had, and maybe this is something that we'll be able to tackle with maybe even with some of our clients. We talk a lot about the importance of vendor partnerships today, and how you can't do it all when it comes to technology. So finding the right vendors and having strong partnerships and relying on them for lots of different things, not just to sell us a piece of technology, but the services piece of that as well, and sometimes the management piece of that as well. But I really do think there's, and it's hard enough to get budget for that. Okay.
It is.
So all of our research tells us that budget is an issue, no matter what we're talking about. So then when you start having conversations about, okay, we're not only going to choose what we think is the best, strongest vendor partner to deliver this solution, but we also need a backup vendor partner, we haven't really.
I wouldn't think of it as a backup so much.
A partner vendor partner.
A partner. Yeah. So in a lot of situations, I think this is more of a behavioral mindset issue from the very beginning. We see risk in organizations that can be as basic as company A acquiring company B and not properly vetting the security implications of that, or an organization, because they want to make a sale or they want to move into a new region, they want to find a new distribution partner. They say, sure, we'll share our data with you, without thinking, do we really need to share all of this data? Right. And if we do share the data, what's the risk associated with that? You get to this point where, the chief risk officer within an organization and the chief trust officer and the chief security officer, they really need to be that same person, or at least that very tightly coordinated group. That team of people that recognize that, just like digital transformation is an ongoing process, an ongoing evolution. Security is the same. It's an ongoing process, and security directly relates to risk within an organization. And you have to think about these up front. But just having that mindset that says, just because we can put data into a database and throw it into the cloud, or throw it into a data center somewhere, is that the right thing that we should be doing? Right. There are certainly behavioral things that organizations need to think about to kind of create sort of that virtual air gap, just simply the road that you shouldn't take in a lot of situations here. And I know you've seen it in your clients and our clients as well. There are a lot of organizations that they get ahead of themselves. They rush. And in fact, we did different study you and I worked on last year, where we found that I think it was 40-50% of the organizations that we talked to said, yeah, sometimes they roll out new products and new initiatives knowing that they're not secure, because they're trying to get that revenue dollar. They're trying to make that deadline, time to market. And that's a very costly, almost a deadly mistake.
Well, it is. And especially when you start thinking about, as I mentioned earlier, we're talking routers and printers, lots of different things that can potentially be dangerous routes and ways for hackers to get in. And I think really where we'll wrap this conversation is in we talk about this constantly. We write about this constantly with our clients, about our clients. I mean, there's just not anything more important than security within your company, whether, regardless of the size of your company. And as you said, I think you made a really good point. Security, like digital transformation, is a journey that never, ever ends. Correct. And you have to be, constantly aware of it. And you have to really always be putting it at the very top of your strategy list. And I think we know that. I think that we know from was it the survey we did for Dell or was it a survey we did for Cisco? Remember the importance of security ranked by senior executives was like at the very top of the list. So,
So that was a collaboration tool. Actually, that was the study we did with Cisco. Across the board, collaboration tools. Security in there doesn't always translate into practical application, because as we found this summer in a follow-up to that Cisco study, where you looked at organizations and how they were addressing the sudden home from work employee. Significant, I think it's 35, close to 40% of organizations were saying, look, our solution to this right now is just let the employees use whatever they want to use. We'll even pay them for it. They can
figure it out.
Just use it. And then we'll deal with the implications after the fact. And that's kind of like, driving your car, walking, parking it alongside the middle of the street and going, hey, everybody, I'm going to leave the keys here on top.
Whatever happens, happens.
Whatever happens, happens. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Well, all right, Fred, it's been always a pleasure hanging out with you. And this topic is fascinating. It'll be really interesting to see what transpires here. I think the one thing that we didn't note was that FireEye, huge props to FireEye.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was in the process of investigating their own cybersecurity incident that led them, after looking through 50,000 lines of code, that led them to discover this, and then they alerted the government. And so, massive props to FireEye.
Because absolutely. FireEye and SolarWinds for being upfront about this and reaching out proactively, and Microsoft as well, their security team that has been working on this with those organizations. So,
it's great.
Kudos to them for finding this threat and bringing it public quickly.
Well, we'll see. I'm sure there's way more that's going to come up as a result of this, and we'll be looking at it. But for everybody hanging out with us today, thanks so much. It's great, always great being here. And Fred, it's great sharing time with you, and we'll be back again soon.
All right. Thanks, Shelley.